Maybe.
Well, you know, we talk about the martyred writers of 1915. Obviously, that's a major part of the story of the Armenian Genocide, the elimination of the leading Armenian writers and intellectuals. And 2015 has obviously seen a substantial production in the realm of literature as well. So we're very pleased to have with us here tonight someone who's never been here before, either to speak or for any other reason. Dana Walrath, who is an acclaimed author. Dana is the granddaughter of Armenian Genocide survivors. She earned a PhD in anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania, an MFA in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and a BA from Barnard College at Columbia University. She is the author of the book about which we are going to hear tonight, Like Water on Stone, published in 2014. It is her first novel, and it was written during the, is this correct? It was written during the year you spent as a Fulbright Scholar in Armenia?
I sold it when I got there and did the final set of revisions. So it had been in the works for a long time before that.
And Dana is also the author of the award-winning graphic memoir series entitled Aliceheimer, published in 2013. Like Water on Stone has been nominated and received a number of awards, including perhaps most notably, it is a finalist for the Vermont Book Award, and hopefully it will win. So please do welcome Dana Walrath.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. For Armenians, you know, coming to Greater Watertown is like coming home. Only here can you be in the store and say, "Oh, good, I'm going to get that stuffed eggplant," and somebody will turn around to you and say, "You should go home and make that yourself." But it really is a pleasure and an honor to be here at the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research to speak about Like Water on Stone. When the book first came out, through my writing buddies, I had opportunities to present about the book in various various bookstores in the Boston area, and I declined because I wanted to speak to my fellow Armenians first. I might not be a marketing genius, but I know my heart, and this is why we're here tonight. So thank you so much for having me. I have to apologize for the colors on that slide. When you look at it on my computer, you can tell that it's maps and Armenian manuscripts there. But so someday you can see the real art. But there it is. Some artwork that I made while in Yerevan. And I come to you today as an artist and a writer and the granddaughter of survivors of the genocide, but I also come to you as an anthropologist, devoted to understanding human diversity across time and space, and devoted to our unity as a species. I believe that speaking the truth about the Armenian genocide matters not just to us, the descendants of this genocide. It's also vital in the context of global social justice and in terms of peace. And so in a world in which political exigencies lead to denying the truth, stories have a special power to bring truths to light. Now, among descendants of genocide, some of us turn away from it. Others, like the members of NAASR, have devoted their lives to documentation, analysis, dissemination of the truth about the genocide. Some of us engage with it in order to heal, but others insist that the stories about the genocide only reify darkness and hatred and pain. For me, creative writing and storytelling is the thread of that Armenian proverb, the one that goes, "Where the needle passes, the thread passes also." So here's my story. Here's how I came to write Like Water on Stone. It all starts with our mothers, doesn't it? And this is my mother, Arami Mashoyan, the little one there. She was born in New York City in 1933, and she's there with her older sister, Rose. I have only the haziest memories of my grandfather, Yarishe Mashoyan, who died when I was around 5. My mother always attributed her father's brooding spirit to the loss of his sons and his first wife during the genocide. I don't remember anything. I mean, that's a picture of him with my little sister, and I can't remember if I remember that picture, if I really remember him. But my mother would tell stories occasionally about him, and one of them is that every night with a shot of cognac, he would have two curses. First, he would curse the Enver Pasha for what he did to the Armenians, and then he would curse Christopher Columbus for discovering America. But after Yahushe went to Soviet Armenia in the early 1960s to see his sisters that he had not seen since 1915, he dropped the Columbus part. And my grandmother there, Ogridar seated, she died long before I was born. She was about a 10-year-old girl when she fled from her home in Palu during the genocide. Now, when I was about that age, I was a grade school girl in suburban New York, not too far away from Peter Balakian, a couple towns north, and I asked my mother to tell me about her mother's childhood. And she replied deadpan. After her parents were killed, she hid during the day and ran at night with Uncle Benny and Aunt Alice from their home in Palu to the orphanage in Aleppo. I was a kid who loved maps, so I got out the atlas and I looked at Palu to Aleppo. I mean, the whole thing made no sense, and it haunted me. And it became the narrative seed that eventually drove me to write Like Water on Stone. Now, Uncle Benny, that's a Vartan there, and Haruchu and Mariam and Ogridar met each other in their orphanage, and that's their daughter, Aunt Alice. Arsha Luis isn't in this picture. Some of them, they were colorful characters in my childhood, but I knew very little about their lives or how they survived. Because in my family, as in so many Armenian families, we did not speak about the genocide. It's just this monolith. Now, as we see in genocides taking place today, when there's no international recognition and no condemnation, the overwhelming individual response to atrocity is silence and shame. You need some kind of collective voice to help make it possible to talk about these things. Now, descendants of genocide, we have only scraps of knowledge about our origins, such as this family tree that my mother drew of her mother's side of the family. So there's Ohridar is there kind of in the middle, and Vartan and Alice are down at the end. I knew hardly any of these people. Beyond this, I knew that the Troshagirians, they were a family of millers, and that somehow a pot came with them to America. Now, the pot is in Niagara Falls with cousins, but in my family, there's enough drama that I've never managed to see the pot. But now I have a pot. I have one in Like Water on Stone. The book opens. 3 young ones, 1 black pot, a single quill, and a tuft of red wool are enough to start a new life in a new land. I know this is true because I saw it. Now, when I was growing up in New York, Tanabur, pilaf, lahmacun, kufta and dolma, Grey Star dinner table. And George Mogordichian playing the oud on the Now Sounds of the Middle East album, like that was the soundtrack. But we were not part of an Armenian community. My mother married an American, an Odar, for the non-Armenians in the room, a non-Armenian. And sometimes, I wonder about my mother's decision. Was it to get away from the tragedy? Was it the tumult of a Tashnagram-Gavar marriage, and those are 2 feuding factions within the Armenian community? Was it to get away from that? Or was it to try and rise in American society, to have her children become blonde, that my mother made this choice? Or was it all of these things? Earlier this month, I got a hint from my mother. I opened a conversation with her. She's far, far into dementia. And I opened the conversation in Armenian, her first language. And she made a face and said to me in English, albatross. It's the kind of insight that sometimes people with dementia, they retain. And so that's what it felt like for her to be an Armenian child in New York City. But still, in her own way, my mother longed to connect to Armenia. So in the summer of 1977, my family had a chance to visit our cousins in Soviet Armenia. And I was 17 and I was enchanted. I had never tasted such apricots. But the visit for my mother, the adult there, it was overwhelming. She felt all the burden of her hard-earned privilege, and I think she was wondering how her life might have turned out. We left nearly all of our possessions behind with our cousins. But I headed off to college, ready to embrace my Armenian heritage. So I joined the Armenian Club at Columbia University. I read everything I could about the genocide. I filled my language requirement with Western Armenian. But I remained an outsider. I had fair skin. I had freckles. I had auburn hair. An Armenian name. A non-Armenian nose. And there I was with Armenian Americans who were struggling to preserve their identity and their denied history. And for them, my half-breed status was all too palpable. And then on top of that, politically, I was very American. So during club meetings, my American self advocated for recognizing other genocides, such as Cambodia's killing fields that were so fresh and raw in the early 1980s. Now, around this time, my mother, who was overwhelmed with responsibilities for the relatives in Yerevan, broke off all ties. I remember a letter coming and her just tearing it. So the legacies of genocide. But as time went on, like my mother before me, I married an Odar, a non-Armenian, a wonderful man who plays the oud. And I too make tanabur, lahmacun, kufta, pilaf, and dolma. And like my mother, I was still yearning to connect. So in the summer of 1984, my husband and I traveled to Western Armenia, Eastern Turkey. Now during that trip, I kept my identity hidden. I was hidden just like the Armenian structures that were scattered all across the landscape, that were labeled only as church or fort. And we looked like a couple of dumb American kids out there. Nobody suspected anything. Now, secrecy was especially good that summer. Every time we saw a Turkish newspaper, and we learned enough Turkish to get by during that trip, because we were going where no one spoke English, there were no hotels, we were really roughing it. So we had our basic Turkish, and we could read the newspaper, and those cover stories were regularly anti-Armenian. And this was 1984. It was at the height of Asala, demanding recognition for the genocide, a radical group that had turned to violence, PLO style. In Mush, a Turkish family invited us to join them at their home for dinner, according to the traditions of hospitality characteristic of the region. And of course, they fed us tanabur, pilaf, lahmacun, kufta, and dolma, and said to me, "I bet you've never tasted anything like this before." And my American self just smiled and said, "How delicious, thank you." I shared the truth of my pedigree exactly twice. The first time was in a tea shop in Kars, near the barricaded, sandbagged Armenian church, 3 weeks into the trip. And we had got, Kars is the city where Orhan Pamuk's Snow is set. So it's right on the border at that time, 1984, of, it was NATO and Soviet bloc, Russia and Turkey. So Armenia was a Russian state at that time instead of an independent republic. We had gone there to gain access to Ani, the ancient capital of Armenia. We had a carton of Marlboros for the bribe, and we were on our way. And after we came back from Ani, we went to find the church, and there was a young man there who started saying things in Turkish that made it clear to me that he had to be Armenian. He said things like, "Ani is the ancient capital of Armenia, That's an Armenian church. There used to be thousands of Armenians living in Kars." So I asked him in Turkish, the only language we shared, "Ermine?" And he nodded. So I explained to him about my Armenian mother and my American father, and he got all excited, and he took my Turkish-English dictionary and started paging through it till he came to the perfect word to describe me: mongrel. He brought us home to meet his family, and a giant loom filled the main room of the house, and his sisters sat there side by side, tying tight carpet knots. He told us about the time he had spent in prison because of his political activism. He told us about how the remaining families managed to find other Armenians to marry. That loom and his sisters made their way into like water on stone, and so did mongrels like me. I want to read to you about from the loom. I was so busy getting out the PowerPoint, I didn't get out my book. This is Sosi, 14-year-old Sosi, sitting at the loom in the winter of 1914-15. Long, cold months, I work at the loom inside, with Vahan's note tucked under the loom so its words flow through me as I weave. Like the nightingale, I warbled round my rose with wings displayed. Inside the patterns of diamonds and leaves, I've knotted birds into full, fearless flight. Others perch on branches, feet clasping tight. One lies still in her neat rush nest, 3 blue eggs below her warm body. I start a new bird who dreams as he sleeps. He lies on his side, eyes closed, his red chest tucked between a blanket of wings, his beak tilted up. My knots make him seem more dead than dreaming. Perhaps birds dream only when they fly. Mama forbids me to take out the rose. It wastes good wool, she says, and mistakes make the next carpet better. But I take out each knot with a small knife, hiding the fistful of rich red wool deep in my pocket. Take the knife and slay me straight away, says the poet Sayat Nova. Mama will never know. The second time I shared the truth was in Palu, my grandmother's long-lost home. We approached Palu via the unmarked Armenian church that's perched high on the hilltop above the town, its roof missing and its walls defaced. And in town, we asked if there were any mills nearby, Deirman var. And we were sent across a modern bridge built over the crumbling one of stone with 8 arches. And we followed the river's bank up to a fast-flowing stream and then headed up the stream into the woods until we reached a mill with a series of attached buildings running up the slope like stepping stones. On the rooftop of the largest building, the headscarf lady of the house served us sweet tea in clear glass cups. A half-dozen children with big brown eyes watched and listened, mounds of apricots dried in the sun. When I asked her about the history of the mill, she said it had been in her family for 60 years. But before that, it had belonged to Armenians. So I told her the truth about my family. We held each other's gaze as the water hit the mill wheel and the stones on the stream. And the official Turkish policy of denial evaporated for one brief moment on that rooftop. It took me many years to process that journey. First, I did it through a series of dry point images of the landscape gouged into copper plates. And if you ever want a medium to cope with anger, dry point's it. You take, it's metal on metal, so every line takes so much force. But it wasn't until decades later that I started writing like water on stone. From Palu, I remembered the pink hillsides. I remember the green color of the eastern branch of the Euphrates River, walking through the woods, finding a mill, the mounds of apricots drying in the sun. I remembered the ruined church, and from the books I'd read, and from my wounded relatives, I knew the violence and the horror. But from anthropology, I knew the dangers of dehumanization, of summing up groups of people and writing them off. From that trip to Turkey in 1984, I knew firsthand what it felt like to be one of them, the hated other. I also knew the importance of separating individuals from horrible acts of governments. This kind of us and them classification is genocide's pernicious first stage. When I sat down to write the story of 3 siblings, Shahen, Sosi, and Mariam, who made the journey from Palu to Aleppo, all these fragments had to come together to tell a story, to create a whole that reflected every single one of these truths. Now, the form of the story, free verse, chose me rather than the other way around. I was poetry phobic as a young person, so here's my first novel is in verse. And I think it came that way because everyday language can't express the scale and horror of genocide. I mean, severed heads, rape, rivers red with blood, stinking heaps of dead bodies, the living emaciated, naked, sunburned, marching through the sand. We all turn away. We have to hold the reader. I could only put it onto paper in fragments that slowly accumulated into a story. Now, far into the writing process, it came to me that in addition to the voices of Shahen and Sosi and Mariam, that I needed an omniscient narrator who could hold the reader safe. And that's when the eagle, Ardziv, and his magic came into this story. Ardziv made it safe for me as I wrote. He makes it safe for the reader, and he makes it safe for the young ones as they traveled. But a character like Ardziv is more than just a magical being. Ardziv is the strength that lives inside of all of us. Imagination lets us see beyond political and cultural boundaries, and it lets us connect to one another as human beings. Ardziv opens up the story. 3 young ones, 1 black pot, a single quill and a tuft of red wool are enough to start a new life in a new land. I know this is true because I saw it. We track our quills when they fall always. With eagle eyes we can see from the sky who picks one up from the ground or rescues it from the crook of a bent branch. The quill's mottled color blending in with peeling bark. It was the girl who picked up my quill. She and her mother worked side by side, plucking frothy white beetle bodies from leaf and stalk. They crushed them between fingertips and used this insect blood to turn their carpet fibers the richest red. Clever. When my feather dropped, the girl, the older one, Sosi, almost full-grown, her body budding, stirred from her work. The little one, Mariam, napped on a carpet beside her. Sosi, named for plane trees that stand tall on this land. Her short, quick inhale as she saw it tugged the air around me. She wiped her red-tipped fingers on her apron before reaching up. Look, Mama, a new mizrach for Papa. A 9-beat song pulsed through my wings. A musician? What luck. If my quill could pull laments from the strings of an oud, I thought then my heart might heal. That quill is for your brother, the mother said. It's time that Shahen learned to play. A young musician? More luck. Far beyond this beetled field, where river cut through mountain, a curly-headed, big-eyed boy shivered when she spoke. Shahen, sons here as eagles see. Fast green water flowed along the distant bank. An arc of giant stones rose from the riverbed, bending the current's forward force. Water seeped back behind these stones, forming a still pool for Shahen, his face reflected in the water, so delicate, like Sosi's. His thumb and fingers curled round a flat, smooth stone. He bent his hand tight toward his arm. One fierce flick of his wrist sent the stone to water. It skipped 9 times like the beat of a song. Ripples spread through the top of the pool, then sank into its surface. Then to no one, to the air, perhaps to me, Shahen said, no one plays oud in America. My musician, what luck. Now, I sold Like Water on Stone, as I said before, and completed the final set of revisions in 2012, 2013, while I was living in Yerevan as a Fulbright Scholar, doing a project that builds on my Aliceheimer's work. So that's the graphic memoir series about my mother and dementia. And there's a few comics coming in the talk, and they're all from that series. Now, but when you're there in Yerevan, those of you who've been there, eagles are everywhere. They're on monuments, on currency, on official seals. They're carved into Gerhard, as you see here, a church that's carved out of stone into a hillside. They're on the cascade steps. My editor, knowing that I wanted more than anything for this book to contribute to dialogue, to peacemaking, to reparations, asked me to show why was the eagle aligned with this family, with the Armenians. How could I cast that character in a way that wasn't going to alienate a Turkish reader? Because I want to have the conversations. I want the forward momentum here. And when she asked me that question, I realized that Ardziv gave me a way to deal with questions of honor and revenge. And here's Ardziv. What you need to know is that drum cap is eagle for fez. Ardziv. I circled above, watching Shahen swim in the river with the young drum caps. That's when I saw him, that boy, the drum cap with the toothy grin. He was with the man with the red drum cap and the stiff white beard, trimmed and combed and polished, so it spread out and down like the feathers of a tail. That man shot my mate. The man clapped the boy on the shoulders where wings would have sprouted were he a bird. They laughed. They watched her fall, as did I. From our nest, my talons balled into fists so as not to harm the chicks. For 40 days, my mate had stayed there on the nest till this brood had hatched. 3 eggs this time, with me bringing all the food and fresh pine sprigs. One by one the young emerged, in the order they were laid, their egg tooth breaking through the shell, their eyes partway closed, no true feathers, just gray-white down, and open mouths, open shut, open shut. She would never leave them in those early days. It takes 2 full weeks for eaglets to hold their heads up for feeding, open mouths, open shut, open shut. She was bigger, swifter, as are all females of her kind, but I was good for my size. That year I brought so much food no chick would need to eat the other, so ample were my hunts. Young rabbit, marmot, skunk, which she shredded and fed into their open mouths, open shut, open shut. But eagles suffer when they cannot fly. As the young grew strong and their wings expanded and black-tipped fingers replaced their down, the young one's appetites peaked. It was time for her to fly again. I pushed her from the nest as I had done before. She flew straight into a bullet. The man ran across the earth to where she fell, the man's red hat bobbing with each step. They did not slash her gut to find sustaining blood and muscle. Instead, they plucked her, starting with her wings, her glorious wings, the father on one side, the son on the other. Each spread the finger of one hand across her skin to hold it taut, and took feathers with the other, one at a time. Taking hold, they snapped their wrists in one direction, along the axis of its anchor, and then snap to the opposite side in an arc, snap to pull it free. Feather by feather they plucked her naked, the father's red hat bobbing up and down as he worked, laughing with his son, rousing hate inside me for all the drum-capped ones, the Turks. They didn't eat her as a hunter would. They laughed as she fell to the ground. They took her quills, pulled them from her, and left her naked for the vultures, carrion, a thing we eagles almost never touch. So I wrote that scene while living in Yerevan, and from my apartment, from the balcony, I could look out to Ararat, and from my kitchen windows, I could look up to Mother Armenia holding the sword with the great Ferris wheel on her right flank. I could also start the journey of connecting with my Armenian cousins. I have more cousins in Armenia than I do in the United States, and I've only just begun to find them, and what riches I've found. Over the past year, 2 of the great-granddaughters of my grandmother's older brother from Palu, Sarkis, that guy right in the middle, have been part of a project at Yerevan's Tumos Center to make an animation of Like Water on Stone. And I was there in Yerevan for its premiere on April 21st, and this single image gives you a hint of how stunning the animation is. I'm also in touch with another Troshevskian cousin who hails from the other side of the border that's still closed between Armenia and Turkey, Zuflu Sebskaya. My grandmother's oldest sister, back on that chart there, was married to a Kurd. When the genocide came, she fled with a son and left her baby daughter behind. Today, this daughter's grandson owns a series of restaurants in the Netherlands and Turkey, all called Hartput, and for the non-Armenians in the audience, that's the name of the old name of a city that got changed when Ataturk established the republic and changed so many cities' names. It's now Aliceheimer, and though I'll never know whether this marriage was forced or an appropriation or a love match, it's amazing that he's calling these restaurants Hartput there. So this marriage created mongrels like me, and that's another truth that found its way into the book. I realized how lucky I was to be completing like water on stone while I was in Yerevan. Whenever I needed to do more research, I could follow that ritual of walking there that tens of thousands of Armenians do April 24th, their steps honoring those who died in the Syrian desert. An Aleppo of the past was ever present because of the massive influx of refugees from Syria. Now, my anthropological fieldwork involves spending time with Yerevan's oldest citizens, and they became the grandparents that I never knew. And they ended up contributing in very unexpected ways to my revision process. I met with them in Mission Armenia's active senior groups. I went to their homes. I met them at church. They passed down medicinal remedies to me, and they shared the stories of their lives with me. Here they are introducing me to khash. This is a stew from Soviet times. It's boiled pig's feet and garlic, because that's all there was, and you put stale bread in it and drink a lot of vodka. Now, of course, they asked me about my family. And when I told them about my mother's dementia, they always asked me, was she a genocide survivor? As though only such trauma could create memory loss. There was a grain of truth in this question that kept on coming up, and it prompted me to start seeing a very deep connection between genocide and dementia. We were haunted by some memories, yes, but then we're terrified by memory loss. And when people don't recognize the memories that we have, we consider it that it's our minds that make us human. Think of the fear-born stigma that surrounds any kind of mental illness or difference. Stigma is a kind of dehumanization that permits changing the rules of social behavior. Dehumanization opens up ways, the way for groups of people to do things that they wouldn't normally do, like mass murder. Dehumanization is the third stage of genocide. In anthropologist Gregory Stanton's original white paper that was presented to the US State Department in 1996, this model is now in the anthropology textbook that I co-author. Starts out with classification, distinguishing people into us and them. Symbolization, elaboration of identity with names or symbols. Star of David, crosses, that crescent, that white crescent moon. Dehumanization, the removal of personhood that lets behaviors reserved only for animals happen, like butchering. Organization of militias, so governments can deny the acts, the chetes. Polarization of hate groups who drive people apart. I think everyone in America and the world needs to know this model. Think of all the hate groups active in the United States right now and the consequences of that. So Armenians can really be leaders in global social justice. And it's been so gratifying to see that starting to really happen now. Preparation, when the victims are identified and separated into ghettos and marched into the desert and things like that. Only then is the extermination and the actual killing. And then genocide always ends with denial that the events took place and the denial of that history. So that means that this year we're not just honoring the 100th anniversary of events from the past, we're commemorating a genocide that's still ongoing, because genocide doesn't really end until denial ends. And that fact is what gives permission for genocide to continue. 83 million people died in the 20th century of genocide, from the Armenians, the Holocaust, Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and beyond. And it's continuing today in Myanmar, Sudan, Congo, and of course in Syria and Iraq. Now, I've heard some say that the denial of genocide by Turkey, they compare it to a collective cultural dementia. But we know that not all citizens of Turkey have been affected by this kind of memory loss. I mean, we've got our heroes, Turkish scholars, artists, writers, intellectuals, activists like Taner Akçam, Ümit Ungür, Elif Shafak, Orhan Pamuk. They've brought these truths to light, sometimes paying for their courage with time in jail or exile. And it's in that same border-crossing spirit that I wrote Like Water on Stone. I chose an imaginative instead of a scholarly form for a very particular reason. I mean, I've got a doctorate in anthropology and I could have gone there, but what I feel is that the scholarship absolutely unequivocally documents that this genocide takes place, and what we're up against is the strategic importance of Turkey that allows it to be denied or couched in euphemisms by governments such as ours. I think that stories can get around that denial in ways that historical accounts can't exactly. I mean, they're a good marriage. In fact, what I spoke about this with Taner Akçam. He said, we're just back in the kitchen. You're out there serving it to everybody. That's how he described the relationship. But I've thought about this a lot because I could go either way, and my American self has the perfect metaphor. Stories are a classic end run. That football play where the carrier, instead of breaking through the defensive line, goes around it. So if we think of governments, Turkish denial and lack of full recognition by countries like the US and the UK as the defensive line, stories bypass governments and they go straight to the hearts of individual citizens. Stories get the healing started. And then, as we disseminate those stories and realize that they're touching others, the healing, it expands geometrically. I hear regularly from American readers who read the book, knew nothing about the Armenian Genocide, and say that then they spent hours online researching about the Armenian Genocide. I mean, so it is a marriage. They go hand in hand, but the story can bring them in. Spreading our stories to the world, it counters denial politics very powerfully. And teachers and librarians know that stories can do this. And they've embraced the book, and Random House has been fantastic. They created a beautiful study guide, educator's guide, to help embed it in school curricula. It's available for free on my website and on the Random House website. So any of you who know any teachers out there, spread the word. It's a beautifully done guide. Now, back to my story and my healing. Now, when I was young, my mother was a biology teacher, and sometimes she patted me on the head and she told me that I had hybrid vigor, as though I were some new disease-resistant strain of apple or squash or pomegranate. And over time, what I've learned is that the strength of my mongrel nature is more cultural than biological. As a half-breed, I was as affected by the U.S. Civil Rights Movement as I was by the genocide survival stories that I inherited. This is my mother, Aravni, Alice, at Duke University in 1954, overhearing people talk about her on the cafeteria line. Together, my Armenian and American selves make me look for the common humanity as well as the accurate recognition of history. They make me expand the principle, Martin Luther King's principle from his letter from Birmingham jail when he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We can also expand that and say that injustice at any time is a threat to justice always. Now, as so many of the elders that I worked with spontaneously shared the stories of their parents during the genocide with me, things that I never heard from my own grandparents, as they corrected my Armenian, as they would of a young child's, as I learned dance steps, as I wrote a novel that imagines the journey of my young grandmother from the single sentence that I had. My anger at the denial of this history subsided, and it made me into a better advocate for Armenians and for global social justice, because then instead of being trapped in the anger, I could find the ways to move it forward. Because we're a people who've survived genocide. We are mastering the bitterness. We found a place in our hearts to forgive individual citizens and not fall into that trap of classification and dehumanization, even when governments don't follow that same course. So my dream for Like Water on Stone is for it to be translated into Armenian and into Turkish, and for it to be a vehicle for conversation and individual connection that will continue to contribute to forward momentum, for reparations, and for normalization of relations between the two countries. And I do not think that these two things are mutually exclusive. And that, again, is the privilege of being a novelist. We get to imagine. And we get to keep on saying that and support the politicians by saying that again and again and have the historians back us up. But I'm going to put the big imaginative idea out there. The good Turks and Kurds present in this book open that door, at the same time that the book minces no words about the atrocities that were committed by the Ottoman Turks in 1915. In fact, I've even was so graphic with the violence that sometimes it gets a 16 and up mark on it, which really surprises me, that we live in a world where we're more careful about tender American readers than we are about young people everywhere who are facing all sorts of horrors. But there it is in the book, and I would just love to be the one, be there helping, having those direct conversations, being in schools in Turkey and helping to change the educational process there. My oldest son, Nishan, once asked me if music was our religion. And what that question said to me is that art, imagination, is inside of all of us. In the face of horror, it's imagination that lets people survive. I have to bring up Artziv again, because he's a product of imagination, of my imagination, of Sosi and Shahen and Mariam's imagination as they're journeying on this story. And because you know how bitter he was, he has to journey. He has to find his way to figuring out how he is going to think about the world. Now Papa, the humanist, the musician, is Artziv's moral conscience. Green Mountain fields turned into gold as wheatgrass curled and ripened. Harvest songs rose from the fields as sickles slashed the stalks. One August night as the sun hung low and colors filled the sky, Mama and Sosi spread a rich red cloth across the floor with platters of food upon the cloth. Shahen carried Mariam on his shoulders, holding her round knees as he darted down the path to greet the guests. Mariam flapped her arms above him like a baby bird, unbending her knees and rising at the sight of Anahid, who quickened her step when she saw them. I flew in quite close, not believing my eyes at the sight of her husband and his parents behind her. They wore headscarves and prayer shawls. This was a family of Kurds. Kurds who pray with drum caps, bowing south 5 times each day. Young Asan, the husband of Anahid, his parents, Kaban and Paliwan. Back toward the house, Mariam walked and then flew, suspended between the hands of Anahid and Paliwan. Last light faded from the sky as they ate, but surprises did not end. Another lone man came up the path with a curious slanted walk. He pressed and pushed to arrive, leading with his heart, a doumbek drum its sides inlaid with mother of pearl, held tight against his body. His arm squeezed the drum's waist, the goatskin taut across its top. But something pulled him from the backs of his legs as he moved forward. A round drum cap on his head said, no mistaking it, this Mustafa was a Turk. Imagine, like falcons and hawks, right inside my nest. It was one of them, a falcon or a hawk it had to have been, who came to my nest after the drum cap shot my mate. Tucked into a rock, high on a ledge, the nest could be reached only by one with wings. I'd left them alone, the young ones. I had no choice. Their mouths were always open, open shut, open shut. Their flight feathers not yet full. I had waited in the nest till I spied a plump gray rabbit. Within minutes I was back, my beak full of flesh for them, but the nest was already empty. Hidden by night now, I dropped down to low branches as the music began. Soothing music, music soothing my sore heart. My quill plucked sweet sounds from the strings of an oud, drawing me in. Shahen too, Mustafa's steady hand beat his dumbek. Kaban's cheeks emptied, then filled the duduk with sound unceasing with his constant breath. Lydian melodies like oil flowed, mother tongues in unison blending, thick umber of Turkish coffee, Armenian apricots ginger ripe, blue Kurdish moonlight above us. Misak and Kevork stood, arms out, hands on shoulders, catching the beat of the song, the tamzara with their step. 1, 2, 3, stomp, stomp. 1, 2, 3, stomp, stomp. Asan joined the line, now an arc, Mama and Paliwan between them. 1, 2, 3, stomp, stomp. Shahen did not dance. He had only eyes for my quill. His lips turned up as Papa pulled my quill across the string. But as the song ended, Shahen jumped up. Sosi too, they pulled Anahi to her feet to make her dance with Asan next. The young couple wound round each other like eagles courting, though one of them had falcon blood. Talons locked, cartwheeling through the sky, the line between their eyes never breaking, the melody of the slow, sweet song twisted and turned around itself, our eyes all on them, Mustafa tender and sweet, Kaban and Papa proud, Misak and Kevor dreaming, mothers blushed, children shushed. Sounds of the stream on the stone and the wood filled the air till Papa rose to stand, his hand across his heart. My wife's brother is a faraway fool to hold back his blessing for Anahid and Asan. Here it is clear. You men are my brothers. Our books differ by one prophet only. The sun does not shine on one man and his family, keeping others in the dark, even in New York. When falcons or hawks came to my nest, I must confess, I sang a different song. Stories can lead us to accomplish what seems unimaginable, to hope, survive, and connect, to build a bridge from dark places to joy. We know this complexity. We know this connection in the marrow of our bones, that place where our bodies make our blood and keep us flowing like water on stone. Human connection deserves our widest smiles. Stories resist reducing individuals to categories. Stories make ourselves visible and known and understood. Where the needle passes, the thread passes also. The words of stories are that thread that passes through the hole made by the needle. And in this way, stories let us make peace and move on, even if our history has been denied. Thank you. All from that trip in 1984. That is the mill. Is it our mill? I don't think so, because now that I've written the book, a distant cousin and my mother's older sister are filling in some pieces, and I now know that we're from Set Village, which I didn't know before writing this book. So talk about another way to get gifts from writing a story. So.
I'm sure you will entertain some questions.
Absolutely.
But I would urge you to pick up a copy of the book, and of course Dana would be happy to sign it for you, and read it or give it as a gift, or give it to your school library, or release it into the wild in some fashion. But get it out there for readers. It's there are a lot of books, a lot of novels on the general subject of the Armenian Genocide. This one is a totally unique approach to the subject, and don't be scared either, because it doesn't look like a novel. But just read it. So anyway, that's my brief editorial comment, and Dana will take
Thank
some
you.
questions.
Thank you, Lord. Yes,
Thank you, Dana. That was really wonderful to listen to.
thank you.
I wanted to ask, so I didn't quite understand, did you think of Armenian before you went to Armenia? Was that part of the initial idea that you had when you were creating the story, or did it come to you later on in the
It came later on in the process, but before I sold the book. So I had already found Artziv. I guess I found him around this time in 2011. And once I found him, the whole story fell into place. And so the editor bought it based on that, but then she asked me questions to fill in more of it was really interesting because every question just made a new scene come out. So and all of the editorial questions were responded to while living in Yerevan. So but Artzi was there beforehand. And eagles were everywhere. Oh my goodness.
Well, I guess I would ask then about, just in general, the bird theme. Is that something that you engage with because you realize that birds were such an important part of Armenia and for Armenian, the natural landscape?
Yes, I mean that is part of it. And when you look at illuminated manuscripts, birds are everywhere, the bird alphabet and all of that. I had that all subconsciously in me, and especially from being to Yerevan, being in Armenia in 1977, it was all there. But as a storyteller, I knew I needed some kind of omniscient narrator, and that could be in lots of different places at once. The book maybe that I drew some inspiration from was Marcus Zuzak's The Book Thief, where death is an omniscient narrator. And so death is present everywhere and then can editorialize and watch. And so I knew I had to have something all-encompassing. And an eagle, I knew because of the journeying, I needed someone who could see better and cover a lot of ground. So it became a bird. And writing is fascinating because things happen. You know all that stuff that is there and important culturally, but it's buried in your subconscious, and then their storytelling mind gloms onto it, and so it became a perfect marriage. Before Artziv was even in the book, Shahen and Mariam had a bird game that they would play. You didn't hear it all from Mariam, but she's sitting on the mill house, swinging her legs back and forth, feet up, feet down, heels hit house, feet up, feet down, Shahen, come home, time to play the bird game, time to play the bird game. So before there was an eagle, there was a bird game in the book. So I think that subconsciously I always knew birds were us. Yeah, there's a question back there. Hello.
I was curious whether you know of any schools that are using the book as part of their curriculum, and how are they using it?
I spoke at the Farahian school last year, last spring, and I think that they're using it. I'm about to go to the American Association of School, the ASSL conference, and to NCTE and the National Conference of Teachers of English, and I'll hopefully be hearing from teachers. I know that it is getting used, and that's because the publisher doesn't send you there unless that's happening or whatever. So I know it's happening, but I haven't had that much of a chance to really be doing those visits myself, except for some Armenian schools. I was the Harrow International School in Beijing. I actually spoke there, so they were using the book there. So it's but hopefully I'll be able to tell you a lot more about that soon.
So, related to that, have you been in touch, or have they been in touch facing history and ourselves? Has that been?
We've been emailing, and we have to sit down and meet. That's the next trip to Boston. I'm planning ahead for that because they do beautiful work, and I think it will be great to partner with them.
Yeah.
And I was also just learning about the new Canadian organization, the named after the Canadian nurse. I wrote it down. The Sarah Corning Institute. That is like Facing History and Ourselves. So she was a Canadian nurse who took in a number of Armenian orphans back at the beginning of in the early 20s and maybe right after 1915. I don't know her exact story, but that's a group in Canada.
Do you have sort of a target age that you had in mind when you were writing it of readers?
I always think of, I think that I'm comfortable with 12 and up because I think that I think it's a great book for adults. I love that it's in the world of schools because then you want to reach people when they're young and they're malleable. And so I love that it's in the school market, but I also know that it's an absolutely, I have had human rights friends, not Armenian friends, and writer friends that in the adult writing world who are just really moved by the book. So I think 12 and up. It does get graphic in places, so but I think that 12-year-olds know a lot about a lot of graphic things, and it's handled very delicately and so forth.
There was this horrible article in the Times, I believe, about warnings that college professors give regarding certain books. Oh God, yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the whole purpose of books is to open people's minds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm very moved by a lot of what you said, and it sounds like a wonderful book. So
Thank you.
I have some reactions, however, not to the book, which I haven't seen, and it sounds wonderful, but to the way you presented your talk. I was born in Turkey. I'm Armenian, so and I'm a musician.
Oh, great.
I've lived here 40 years and educated here. I'm married to a non-Armenian who refers to Armenians as we in conversation. So, my point was, so our children are mongrels. When you mentioned about being a mongrel, making you more aware of civil rights and other humanities, I experienced this way of humanness and oneness as a Turkish Armenian in the first place.
Yeah.
But I would not necessarily attribute that, to your Mongol experience here. I think I mean, I have also become very conscious about civil rights and movements in the States. And I'm not a Mongol myself, but and it's not only because of my husband and so on. So I wasn't sure that you need to quite justify your being a mongrel and therefore it's friends. I think it's just fine,
Yeah.
The other thing was that when you say, when you mentioned Tanelaktam saying we are in the kitchen and you were just serving the food, with all due respect to Tanelaktam's work and help and everything, I disagree. This is our story. You're living it. We have lived it in our families, and I'm sorry, but we are very much serving the food. So I think that needs to be put out there too. And I think also as an artist, you, I, and everybody else should be a lot more confident about what we are offering in parallel with the history. So I just wanted to give that.
Those are really good points. Thank you. It's really interesting to think about it. I'll see if I can remember and touch back on them all. The perspective that you have as a Turkish Armenian meant that you were all you know about multicultural things. And I'm a person who grew up and remember vividly. I grew up in the 1960s, and I remember vividly having a friend in 5th grade who was Armenian and looked Armenian. And the other kids teased her and made fun of her. And I looked American, and I had an American name, and I could fit in. And so you're right that it is something that's dated, but I do think that that this world is still full of people doing us and them and who's inside and who's outside. But you're absolutely right about that broadening the conversation, having it be more global, you know that automatically. In terms of Taner Akçam, I think it wasn't an Armenian Turkish thing, it was a scholar, yeah.
I am Anatolia about that, but also
Yeah, it was.
within that, the fact that we as Armenians have experienced
Yeah.
that, and as artists, we are also providing something very significant from inside out, better.
Yeah. And I think he was trying to say that the artists are doing that the artists do something that the people really notice. And that there's, I think, and I should get, when you're back in the kitchen, it's you know, chopping, it's sort of, it's the tedious work or whatever. And that the artists take that information. Now we know how I know you play scales. I write a lot of drafts of things, so we work very yeah.
Not fiction.
Yeah.
But I do write.
Yeah, no. So we artists know what hard work that is, but I think he was commenting on something very real. That the average person doesn't read history, and the average person does listen to music and looks at art, and I think art has special powers that that we can channel, and I'll work on honing my arguments with what you are saying, because I think those are good points.
I think this is good for the audience. That's
Sure.
why I'm saying it. The audience does pay more attention to art, but does not respect art as much as history or what it perceives as science, which to me, I like sciences too.
Yeah.
Just like
Yeah.
exploring with a certain vision.
Yeah.
So for that reason, it is important. I mean, if he says more people have access to art, therefore it becomes more effective, I buy that.
Yeah.
But if he implies that they are doing the kitchen work and we are just as artists serving the food, then I want to come.
Yeah. I think he was trying to say that we really have a power, because of our broad reach.
Yeah.
But I appreciate what you're saying.
I'm going to ask him who cleans the dishes after.
That's great. Yeah. Oh gosh.
Be interested in
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit more about how old you were when you went to Turkey and how long you spent there?
6 weeks, and I was 22 years old. And my husband was 23. So, and it was really something. I mean, I knew to be careful enough that I registered with the American Embassy, or the consulate in Istanbul. I said, I'm an Armenian American, I'm nervous about doing this, I just want you to know that I'm out there. We rented a car in Paris and drove to Istanbul, and then took a ferry boat across the Black Sea with the car, and we were staying in steerage, because we didn't have a lot of money, so Peter was in the men's third-class place, and I was in the women's, and I went to bed at night on the bunk bed, and I woke up, someone's shaking the bed, and I thought, oh no, oh my gosh, but this is it. I was really petrified, and as it turns out, I hadn't noticed that a German tourist had claimed that bed already. And she just wanted me to change beds. But then once we got out there, it was really amazing, just church after church. And when I was finally in Armenia and got to a church like Ahtala, where you can see frescoes intact, I kept on seeing frescoes with faces removed and all that kind of damage. And I remember overhearing, just really terrible conversations at various times. But then there were, but I saw the land, and that meant so much. And then there were those few moments of really powerful meetings with individuals. So, yeah.
You're a great speaker.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dana, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.